dokey.
All right.
So Barbara, I guess what I wanted to just start with was the big picture. And then we're going to kind of go back in history and dissect some of the
Sure.
particulars. Why is it that you, over the years, over your almost adult lifetime, have been so committed and involved with the Y? What is it about the YMCA of Central Florida?
It started because I looked at where the power structure was in Central Florida. I came here from Pennsylvania, and from Pittsburgh was my home. And when I married in 1950 and came to West Orange, Winter Garden, I looked around and tried to figure out where I fit in and what there was for me to do. I spent probably 2 to 3 years establishing myself in Winter Garden as Bert's bride and as a newbie. I was a Yankee, a damn Yankee. I married the eligible bachelor in town, and I was an interloper. And I tried to figure out what there was for me that gave me something to latch on to. I tried a number of women's organizations. As a graduate of a school, college, I was told by some women who I knew had good experience that there were a couple of things that if you moved to a new community, that you could find a place for yourself. League of Women Voters was one of those organizations. What's the other group? Women in education. I can't think of the name of because I haven't thought about it in many years. So that was another one. Then I looked at the Y in West Orange. It was still very much of a small organization. And I thought, okay, there's an opportunity for me to establish myself that was primarily a men's organization, but still had room for women. And when I first came here to this area, that was not something that was easy to find. Men dominated the community of West Orange. It all dominated Orlando. And if you wanted to become involved in anything with a power structure that allowed a woman to become a member and to grow and learn and become involved in not just that organization, but it's also the community at large, you had to make your mind up where you wanted to try. And the YMCA was sort of opened its door. There were not too many women involved in the Y when I first got involved in it. Certainly not in the Orlando area. I don't think that there was any negative to it. It was just that it was a men's organization, and they pretty much kept it that way. And so it seemed to me, through West Orange and what at that time was West Orlando, that there was an opportunity for me to find a place that was comfortable and interesting and allowed me to be who I was and wanted to be. And so I attached myself to the community of West Orange, but also latched on to the YMCA. And it opened so many doors for me. During those times, it was the community, both Central Florida as well as all of Florida and the Southeast, offered itself women an opportunity, and that's where I wanted to be, is to see what could happen. And there were not too many women in West Orange County that were interested in doing that. And so when the Y said, hey, there's a place and you might be able to fit in here if you behave yourself. So I thought, oh, that would be fun. That would be interesting.
Tell me about some of the, I'm making a little minor tweak. There you go. Tell me a little bit about some of those early times, your involvement in the Y. What were you doing? Were you on the board, or were you just taking the kids, or just kind of give me an overview? If you don't mind.
This was prior to the time that we had children. We were married for 5 years before our first child was born. And so this was something that I had an opportunity to do without focusing with the children. The children got used to my involvement with the Y because of Camp Weewaw. Our daughter Becky decided when she was 7 years old that she wanted to go away to a sleepaway camp. And so Weewaw was the closest one that I could find. I'd talk to people at church and ask them about a sleepaway camp. And I didn't want to send her to North Carolina. That was a little bit too far for, a 7 or 8 year old, and to be separated from me and not know much about camps in the South. I had been to camp in my area, but I didn't know anything about them. So several women suggested that I might want to try YMCA because Camp Weewaw was very easy to get to from where I was. And I took Becky up, and she adored it. And when she got home for the first time and started telling her brothers about her experience at Camp Weewaw, their eyes got big as saucers, and they were ready to go right away. And so Weewaw and the YMCA sort of opened the door for Becky and for my rest of my family. And as I said, I didn't know anything about the YMCA. In Pittsburgh, where I grew up, the Y was strictly a men's organization. Women were not even allowed to go inside. Now, that changed during the time that before I was married. I was a member of a Presbyterian church in East Liberty, which is a suburb of Pittsburgh. And the church needed additional facilities when it was doing some renovations, and the Y was across the street from the church. And the church said, "Come on over here, we've got room. We'd be happy to have you." So for the first time, I walked into a YMCA because of the Presbyterian church in my area. And I felt good. It opened a door, and it allowed me to see what this big, fancy-dancy building that I had watched for years and knew that I was not allowed to go in there because it was a man's organization. And so to come down here and have an opportunity to be part of the Central Florida YMCA was not only fun, but it was a challenge. And I was very fortunate that they said, "Hey, this is an okay place." And because I was interested in doing some of those things with the Y, they sent me to organizational meetings in Tampa and in Jacksonville, finally up to Atlanta. And so because I was a woman, because I came from a small community and was willing to invest some time and effort in this organization, it offered, and I accepted their offer to become involved in it. And when I first got into this board, it was the Northwest branch of the YMCA, and it was in College Park. which then became the Northwest branch for Camp Weewaw, and that's what got me involved in that with my children. So this is a long story, and it's probably getting pretty boring. But I was at the right place at the right time for a woman to become involved in the transition that was happening in Central Florida. And the Y sent out a notice from National that every YMCA had to be integrated with women. And that was a shock because the men owned this organization here in Central Florida. The women were allowed to go swimming in the swimming pool because of this, what do we call it?
Mandate?
Yeah, mandate from National Y. And so we had to determine when it was going to be an okay time for the women to go swimming, because in those days the men swam without their trunks. Oh, shocking. So anyway, this Y did integrate, and it allowed me to go to the swimming pool, which really was not something that I was terribly interested in. But it allowed me to go to classes. It allowed me to open up some opportunities in West Orange. We started a brand new Y out there, and it became integrated. It did pretty much of everything that was going on in most of the Ys in Central Florida. And it also allowed me to be a representative to Tampa, to Jacksonville, and eventually into the Savannah area and on up into Atlanta.
Let me ask a question. Let me paint a picture for you,
Sure.
and then have you fill it in a little bit. So here you are, a young woman who has found herself on the board. You said
Northwest.
Northwest. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And you go to that first meeting, and you're the only woman in the room.
There were two of us, I believe.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Just walk me through, how that went. Why are you laughing?
Oh, I hadn't thought about that in a long, long time. The other woman who was involved with me took this as being something that was very different, very unusual, and she was not very enthusiastic about it. She had been a member of the board for several years, but had never really stepped forward to become active. But that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to become active. I wanted to be somebody who was broke some barriers and tried some new things. And I was grateful to have her on the board, but we were at different positions. I was considerably younger than she was, and she was very well established with the men. Her job was as an observer more than a participant, but I wanted to be a participant. I wanted to be a leader. I wanted to see things change. And I had done this.
What did you want to do? What was in your vision that you thought, I want to lead this organization to do? Where were you wanting to take it?
I was headed in that direction. Now you've...
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. Let me back up. I had watched Winter Garden do the same transition that I thought I wanted to see here in Orlando. And so it was a role model for me in many ways to take a small community that was either male or female oriented and integrate it. And that was an unusual situation. Winter Garden had not been a male-female integrated community of doing things together. The men had their men's clubs, Rotary. It was many, many years before a woman was invited into a Rotary club in West Orange. But I saw the possibilities of not being mean or nasty, but I just saw the opportunity because the men were doing the things. They were in charge. And I wanted to be in there with them. That's basically what it boiled down to. I wanted to be a leader. And if you wanted to be a leader, you were a man in those days. But I saw no reason that a woman could not be a leader.
So let's fast forward. So you got involved in that. Okay. Did you make an adjustment? Okay. So you got involved in that Northwest board, and then at some point, somebody tapped you on the shoulder and said, "Gosh, you ought to be involved at the metro level."
Well, that's true. I was a representative from Northwest branch to the Metro Y. That was the system that they had in place, and it still exists to some extent here. And there were a couple of men who were leaders in the Y, both as volunteers and also as staff, that were interested in that integration of women in leaders for the YMCA. And that was the encouragement that I had. And one of those was Bill Phillips, that's a name that probably most of the people who would watch this presentation, they don't remember who Bill Phillips was, but Bill was an innovator. He was interested in pushing this Y into being a standout operation. He took me to an international meeting in Miami, which again encouraged me. There were so many men at that international meeting in Miami that were welcoming women into the organization. Again, and many of the organizations as a YMCA, it was male-oriented. But that opportunity that Bill Phillips allowed me to do primarily through international work with the YMCA opened up so many doors. We brought that whole concept back here, and we had an international committee, and it had some women involved with it. We went to Jacksonville. We did the same thing. We went to Sarasota. We did the same thing. We integrated what had been a strictly men's organization to encourage women not only just to serve the coffee and the donuts, which is what they used to do, but to actually become full-fledged members and doers and active members of the YMCA. And it was great fun. It was a wonderful opportunity. So I thank some of the men. A few of them are still hanging around. And I know the first few times that I went to meetings that were out of this area, in Jacksonville and eventually in Atlanta, and then on up into international. And I got chairmanship of several of the committees that were appointed here locally or in Atlanta or in Jacksonville, and they also offered to me that opportunity to be seen as a woman leader in a men's organization. And I don't think that any of the men were unhappy about that. I just don't think that they had ever thought that this was something that women would enjoy being part of and having a leadership role.
Later, at some point, you also became, if I remember right, the first woman board chair here in Central Florida.
That's correct.
Tell me a little bit about that.
I was secretary for the board here for, I think, 4 years, 5 years maybe. And when they got around to the nominating committee, they came to me again and asked me to be the secretary. And I said, well, I'd be happy to do that, but I wonder, is there ever going to be a chance that I'm going to be anything except the secretary? I didn't take notes. Somebody else did. A staff member did that. But I was, quote, unquote, in a leadership position. But I didn't do any work in that so-called job. But I really wanted to see if I could have a leadership role. Camp Weewalt was one of those areas. I had children that went there, had a wonderful time, and I became a leader, a woman, in Camp Weewalt, which then led me to other opportunities to the Y. But you must remember that those days, men's organizations were men's organizations. And women were not, they were not seen as potential leaders for the men side of it. That changed, that got better. And I think I was part of that. That was same thing was true with the university here in the Central Florida area. I got involved in the women's, the Year of the Woman, where there was a meeting in Houston, and I was sent as a representative from Central Florida. And that opened up some additional opportunities for women to become involved in leadership roles in what I considered a very important organization or enterprise. And the Y certainly was that. There were so many wonderful things that were going on in the world. And in those days, women had their section over there, and men had their section over here. And they very seldom shared leadership roles.
Tell me a little bit about, if I can change
Sure.
direction a little bit, tell me a little bit about the establishment of a YMCA in West Orange County that became the Roper YMCA. How did the idea come up? I don't want to get into the mechanics of the fundraising and things like that, but just walk me through the big picture. How did that happen? Why did that happen?
Yeah. The big picture, as I remember it, was that some of us wanted to have a Y in West Orange, not just be here in Central Florida and come over to Orlando to be a portion of it. We wanted to have a real honest-to-goodness YMCA in West Orange. And so we started talking about it and saying, okay, there's no reason. We knew that there were YMCA branches, as they were called then, in other areas here in Central Florida, all connected with Orlando. But there was nothing in West Orange. And so some of us, in particular some men as well as women, said we want our own YMCA here because we know what it's doing in the Orlando area. We know what it's doing in Winter Park. We know what it's doing in other areas. So let's start something. And it's not going to be just a branch. It's going to be its own stand-up thing all by itself. It's going to run itself. It's going to have its own leadership. It's going to bring in the men and the women in this area that contribute to what the young people can do in this area. We're going to bring the staff in. We're going to bring programs in. We're going to act like we're a real honest-to-goodness YMCA, not just a little stepchild of Orlando. And so that's what happened. And Orlando said, okay, good. That's a great idea. Let's do it. And so we did.
And
we raised money. Oh, that's another area. I was told when I became first involved in this by an executive who I will not name, but somebody might remember who it would be because they can think about the time. But I was told that women could not raise money. And so that was the reason that they were on the board, was that men could raise money. And there was no room for women on the board. They could serve the coffee and they could bring the donuts. But to be leaders, oh, come on, Barbara, you're crazy. And so when we established the West Orange Y, I got the prize for raising the most money of all of that branch for the first time. And the reason that I got it, I think, is because I went to people who had never given any money to the Y before. There had not been a West Orange Y before. It had been Orlando. And so when I decided that we needed to raise money for a new branch of the YMCA, I went to people who had never been asked before, who were well established in West Orange, and wanted West Orange to be a vibrant, exciting community. And I asked them for $100. They gave it to me, and we came in with shining light as raising the most money in that particular cycle of fundraising. So that, I think that sort of helped the whole idea that women could do things like raise money.
But
Yeah.
some jaws dropped.
Oh, they did. And it was a real surprise. But it was fun. I loved to raise money. It's a challenge. I love walking into somebody's office or go into their home and say, hey, I've got a project that I think you're going to want to be part of. Do you know about the YMCA, or do you know about whatever it happened to be? And people respond. They're happy to respond. One of the problems that I see in most of the organizations, not only the Y, but all around the world, is people are afraid to ask. They don't know that it's an okay thing to ask for money. Particularly if you can say, I'm a donor, I've given, and I would like you to match what I've given. Oh, match? What you've given? What are you talking about? You gave $10? No, I give $100. And you want me to match $100 for an organization that I don't know anything about? Oh, you'll find out about that organization real soon. The YMCA is going to do a wonderful job in this community for your young people, for your children and for your grandchildren, and for the community. Okay, all right. I'll take a chance on the Y, and that's what they did years ago, and they're still taking a chance on the Y, all over the world. It's wonderful. It's great.
When you were the Metro Board Chair here, what do you recall? You know, you had a whole lot of regular business. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to do the other. But what was the single one or maybe two big plate things that you had on your plate that you accomplished that you feel good about?
Just the integration of women in the Y. The men basically owned the swimming pool. And one of the remembrances that I have is that when women wanted to use the swimming pool here at the Metro Y, they were not encouraged to do so because the men swam without a bathing suit. And so that created a problem. Where did you have women's restroom if there were men scampering around here without a bathing suit on? So that required a whole new thought process. But fortunately, at the same time, National Board said the swimming pool will be integrated and there will be bathing suits. That came from National.
So when you know, after your stint as the board chair here at Metro, you ended up, you know, one of your next stops was to be, and forgive me, I want to make sure I got this right. Were you the YUSA board chair or a member
No,
of the board?
oh no. It took a long time to get to that point.
Tell me about where you ascended to on
Okay.
the YUSA board.
Yeah, again, it was steps. They wanted, Jacksonville, for instance, was basic headquarters for Florida. And they requested a representative from here to come to Jacksonville. And so the Metro Board asked if anybody wanted to do that, and I said yes, I would be very interested in doing that. I volunteered for it. And they said, okay, go to Jacksonville, and this was like quarterly, I think, or maybe it was once a year, I don't know, whatever it was. And so I drove to Jacksonville and met some people up there, and then Jacksonville became under the umbrella of Atlanta. And Atlanta did the same thing. Said, we want a representative from the Florida YMCA. And so somebody said, well, are you interested in doing, I sent it to the board in Jacksonville and said, is there anybody who would be willing to go to a meeting in Atlanta representing the state of Florida? And I said, sure, I think that would be fun. And so I got the job. And then somebody in Atlanta said, well, we've been asked by National to send somebody to represent the Florida YMCA, and we're looking for somebody who would be interested in doing that. And I said, I would definitely be interested in doing that. And one of the people that I met prior to that was Solon Cousins. Solon was the exec